There's a sense of achievement to being a steel worker, and I think I'm producing quality steel. I remember a sense of pride when my father got made a furnace foreman.
At night, if the furnaces are being tapped, you know, the glow of that can be seen for miles around.
I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. The noise, vibrations all through your body, the lightning show, the firework display.
The fear is that if anything happened to the steel industry, what we got at the moment, that even that will go on. That's a worry.
Imagine a life without steel, and there's not a lot left.
It's not clear that the UK has a competitive advantage in steel, and that we intrinsically don't necessarily need a domestic industry.
It's an industry that's been in crisis as long as anyone can remember, but now Britain, the country which invented modern steelmaking, might plausibly become the first developed economy to allow it to go extinct, raising a few questions. How did it come to this? Does it really matter? And do we even need a steel industry anymore? Late morning at the Port Talbot Steelworks in South Wales. The blast furnace is about to be tapped. This is how we make most of the metal in this country, melting a mixture of iron ore, limestone and coking coal into the furnace and draining out the bottom to produce this red-hot pig iron, which will later become steel. As industrial sites go, there's nothing quite like it. That firework effect you can see behind me, each of those is tiny little pieces of molten iron coming out from the base of this blast furnace. Inside there, temperatures over 2,000 degrees. That's what you need to turn solid rock into molten liquid iron that's pouring out from the base of here. But the striking thing about this is, actually, iron is kind of the side product here. For every ton of steel produced here, there are 2 tons of carbon. Steel is the backbone for the modern world. If it's not made of steel, it's made with steel. But this site is the single biggest greenhouse gas emitter in the country. And the owners, Tata Steel, want to pull down the furnaces and replace them with a greener alternative.
We are looking for a model where we reuse steel, we recycle, we enter into a full circular economy, but we are talking about billions which will need to be invested, and also about energy policy.
And they want taxpayers to bear some of that burden.
We are asking for a support, we are asking for investment. At this point of time, governments in Europe are pouring billions of money into our competitors' industry. In Germany, in France, in Spain, and we are only asking for a similar deal. So we want to have fairness, a fair deal for our communities, for our people.
From piles of iron ore and coal in South Wales to piles of scrap in South Yorkshire. This is the other way we make steel. Here the main ingredient is old parts from cars and appliances. It is, for want of a better word, recycling. Now in Port Talbot, rock was being turned into lava. Here, this is quite literally lightning. Bolts of lightning that are turning solid steel into molten metal. And that thunderstorm, that's actually the greenest way we have of making steel in this country right now, but of course it uses untold amounts of power. This extraordinary process is how they make most of their steel in America these days. In the UK, not so much.
The UK has one of the largest, I'd say, scrap, let's be simple, piles in the developed world. And right now we export over half of that to other countries to turn into steel to bring back into the UK. So what we do here is we make use of that, I'd almost call it, natural recycled resource.
So why aren't we making all our steel this way? A big part of the answer is that this country has higher power costs than nearly every other developed nation.
I would say from a scrap source, as I mentioned earlier, it's a good place to have an electric arc furnace. This is the right kit to have to make steel in general, but in this country. But from an energy standpoint, no. At the end of the day, I think we're still about 30% above what the continent is.
Now, up until recently, the conventional wisdom was that the kind of steel that you make in electric arc furnaces was pretty low quality, but actually what you can see bubbling behind me there in that ladle, that's pretty high quality stuff. It's going into automotives. They also make steel that goes into aircraft landing gear.
Every 3 seconds there's an aeroplane landing somewhere on steel made at this site. There's a lot of pride in that kind of statistic, if you like. I can't see how anyone would think that manufacturing and making steel is going to make you any weaker. It's a strength that we need to embrace.
The problem is power costs make it really difficult for the UK to compete. And the upshot is that no other country in the world, save Venezuela, has seen as sharp a fall in steel production, leading some to ask, do we need a steel industry at all?
Certainly not clear that taxpayer money should go towards massively subsidising a steel industry. It is tragic for people who are in an industry that isn't necessarily sustainable. I think ultimately there's a risk here that you're selling people a lie, that the longer you use taxpayer money and very large amounts of taxpayer money for a very small number of jobs, you're building people up in a sector that doesn't necessarily have as clear a future as you want, and that money I think could probably be better used, focused on those individuals, ensuring that they can get the skills they need to retrain into whatever the future industries are for the UK.
Even the person who'll make the decision over whether to help the industry doesn't sound all that enthusiastic.
Nothing is ever a given. There's a bigger picture around steel beyond should we just save this particular company or help this particular community.
In Port Talbot, they're used to this kind of speculation. Iron runs deep through the veins of the workers and families here.
My grandfather worked in coke ovens, my father worked on a blast furnace, and my boy works in the coal mill there now. The town has shrunk, you know, you look at Station Road, the shops and that, it's not what it used to be, but we'd like to hang on to what we got there. And the fear is that if anything happened to the steel industry, it's going to drive youngsters out of Port Talbot, it's going to drive people out of Port Talbot, you know, they're going to be looking for jobs elsewhere and that.
For the first time in ages, there is a vision of economic hope competing with the familiar visions of despair. This town will soon be part of a free port with the steel mill at its centre. And Tata says it can produce some of the steel needed from its mill. Today, the hot metal which began in the blast furnace gets converted into steel in this basic oxygen converter before being cast into big fat slabs and then squeezed and flattened into long, thin coils. After some more pressing and galvanising, those coils eventually find their way to this plant outside Wolverhampton.
So we deliver it next day into an hour slot service from this facility.
This is still very much just in time right now.
No, absolutely. I mean, that's what the car makers want to be able to do. They want to have the flexibility.
For steelmakers, this is the end of the line. What was once rock and then lava is now a finely honed product that will soon be part of a car. When we talk about steel, a lot of the focus, understandably, is on the beginning of the process, that moment in the furnace with all the fire. But arguably, just as, if not more important, is this bit, the end of the process. There are more than 1,000 different varieties of steel, lots of different grades, alloys, high-strength stuff. But that raises a question. Is Britain actually making the right kinds of steel? Out in the North Sea, you'll find some of the biggest steel structures in the world. These wind turbines contain hundreds of thousands of tons of steel. But here's the thing, barely a fraction of that metal comes from the UK. This is almost all Asian steel shipped in from the other side of the world.
The amounts of steel coming from the UK are very low. We have no supplier for the UK that is supporting on the tower. I've been in contact with many steelmakers from the UK over the years, over and over again, but the main challenge is that none of the suppliers really was capable of delivering the steel that we need for the tower.
That's right, we simply don't make the right kind of steel, the heavy plates you need for the tower. Actually, that's not entirely true. There is a Liberty plant which makes them in Scotland, but well, here's what happened when they tried to use their steel in a turbine.
We've been wanting to build a wind farm with our own steel coming out of DL up in Scotland. It's not cost competitive. So between the energy, number one, and number two, what the imports are, if we were going to develop our own wind farm, it's cheaper to bring it in right now. It's on the line, and it shouldn't be on the line.
Perhaps by now you're starting to see how tricky this is. We can't make the steel for our wind turbines because our energy costs are so high. And those energy costs are high in part because we spent so much to subsidise these wind turbines. Now the steel industry wants its own subsidies to decarbonise, to survive. But what kind of survival?
There was 20-odd thousand people working there at one stage. It was about 12,000 when I started there. Now we're down to, I think it's about just over 4,000.
The brutal reality is that even if Tata gets the money it wants to replace these blast furnaces with electric arc furnaces, many more jobs will go. We understand the current plans imply a workforce of a mere 1,000 people. The country which gave the world the Industrial Revolution could be among the first to replace all its blast furnaces with greener alternatives. But the upshot will be even fewer people working the iron.